Introduction to the Italian edition. As Adios Prison was to be published in Italian, I was asked to write an introduction, not to the book as such, given that it speaks for itself. Those who read it can dream of their escape from their walls, their worlds, their fears. The goals that were attained when the book first came out, that is to say, to inform, denounce, make people aware, push them to protest, revolt, escape. Not by chance it was forbidden in Spanish prisons because it encouraged escape, were all achieved. Although we didn't imagine that this booklet, made almost clandestinely by a few forgotten, isolated prisoners, would reach beyond the next cell. So small was our world. As it is now to be published in Italy 15 years after it was written, 13 after it was first published, we need to go over those years, which led to dramatic changes at all social levels. Prison, a microcosm inserted into our world, but that is denied the possibility to speak, is in its turn the mirror of these changes, which I'm going to try to talk about. As concerns our story, which you will read in this book, I know that you would like to know what has happened to the protagonists of these tales, what changes have occurred in our lives after all these years, in the lives of those prisoners who had the courage to struggle and revolt against the death penalty that none of us deserved, but that very few of us could avoid. The FIES regime, aka Record of Detainees Under Special Surveillance, was introduced in 2001 by the Spanish Home Office and the Department of Prisons. It is nothing less than a special isolation regime inside some prisons, whose function is to control, isolate, and annihilate the prisoners who tried to revolt against the inhumanity of prison. Each time a prisoner attempted an escape, a revolt broke out in the prison and guards were taken hostage in order to denounce the appalling conditions the prisoners were condemned to, not so much by the courts as by the prison institution. At the time, prisons were full of torturers from Franco's dictatorship, supported and protected by a number of judges with the same fascist mentality. The judges assigned to watch over respect for the law inside prison, the magistrates whose function was to control the prison system to ward off the corruption that affects miserable people when they gain power over others, this is exactly what the jailer-prisoner relation is, were all accomplice to the torture. They decided to totally isolate rebellious prisoners when they realized that by transferring them arbitrarily and in secret, transporting them as if they were cattle to be moved to another slaughterhouse, just made the revolt spread to other prisons. Dignity and awareness of being individuals accompanied the bodies swollen with bruises and wounds. It was contagious. They managed to silence us for a number of years, sometimes only temporarily, until we managed to overcome harsh isolation, other times definitively, when a comrade took his life in the cell. The latter was the most common situation. What the FIES prisoners constantly did was to denounce the endless string of deaths that occurred in the Spanish prisons at the end of the 1980s. A huge number of ill prisoners, mostly with HIV or hepatitis and lack of treatment, which was considered too expensive, led to prisoners dying like dogs. Many of them, already condemned by illness, would be happy to die with a bit of dignity in the struggle. The FIES regime was inaugurated with the intention of exterminating us. Quite an easy job, given the approval of the law, the manipulation of information, and the indifference of a society that only cared about its own survival. The macro prisons that were built on a large scale in the 1990s were efficient instruments to disperse, isolate, and silence us, and at the same time offered huge economic profits. Nowadays, at least 1 or 2 macro prisons are built every year, the most recent being in Porta Santa Maria, No. 3, and Morone. Various levels of isolation sections, i.e. narrow spaces of total control inside which 3 or 4 prisoners struggled to survive, were introduced into each new prison. Barrett was the first to die after he was moved to the FIES Invalidolid. He hanged himself. Pedro Vasquez won an appeal at the Constitutional Court and was freed from the FIES regime, but that did not last long, as he was soon back there with us. His sentence was finally reduced and he was released, but his health conditions were so bad that he died of psoriasis. As for Carlos, he obtained a partial freedom and had the chance to enjoy his Barcelona before dying of HIV. That was not unusual. You needed to be very strong to resist the conditions you had to endure in prison. Those who had any illness whatsoever were condemned to death. I found the necessary strength to survive my long stays in the dungeons of democracy without going mad by writing, studying, painting, and exercising. Tario endured more than 20 years in prison, but the effort got the better of him and he died of cerebral hemorrhage in 2005. He published an autobiographical book, Oy Hombre Oy, whose heartbreaking tales led to various collectives giving him unconditional support so that he was released and could die a free man. Redondo is the only one besides me who is still alive after passing through the dungeon of El Dueso. Like the others, he kept his indomitable will to freedom. A year after the publication of this book, he was wounded in the chest by a cop's shotgun while attempting to escape from a police station in Gijon. A cop was killed in the incident. 22 years after entering prison, following a minor sentence for theft, he finally left all this misery behind him. I just hope that all the cruelty he endured won't ruin his life, and that we, the other comrades of this story, will also be able to celebrate his victory. As I write these lines in memory of my comrades, I am still locked up and I don't know the date of my release, as the latter depends on the caprice of those against whom I have always struggled. What is certain is that I am not conquered and I will carry on my feet. Juan Jose Garcia Rodriguez, March 2008.